Let me begin by making a few stage-setting comments. Instead of the usual single or few word title to an exhibition, we deliberately chose a longer title, one that's explicit, one that's challenging, in other words, one that better reflects the debates that turn around the new art movement, which is emerging from a close collaboration between artists and scientists. It is a biology-inspired art movement. And this is a subset of what I like to refer to as science-inspired. And with this exhibition and these debates, what we want to do is to take this art movement into the stratosphere, so to speak. Now, by a new art movement, talking about biology-inspired art, I want to be understood as follows. Actually, biology-inspired art is pretty old. It's 32,000 years old, as is evidenced by cave paintings, paintings of animals on the walls of caves, for example, as found in France. But today the results are striking as never before, because using the most up-to-date scientific and technological devices, artists are taking science out of the laboratory, as this art exhibit abundantly demonstrates. Now, like Cubism, science-inspired art is a highly intellectual art form in that it covers many different disciplines, as well as probing the mind, as well as that enigmatic concept called creativity. And indeed, Cubism is unarguably science-inspired and technology-inspired. These science, technology, and mathematics developments in those subjects, as occurred at the turn of the 20th century, were the most influential aspects on Picasso's thought when he discovered Cubism. Now, some of the artists accomplished this. Merging art and science, let me say, go back to the exhibit. Merging art and science exhibits works that explore the meaning of life, of our bodies, and on systems that exist on the boundary between the living and non-living. Now, some of the artists accomplished this with a broad electromagnetic spectrum, ranging over magnetic resonance imagery, as in the work of Susan Aldworth and Annie Cattrell, who examined brain states and the meaning of the self, to electron microscopy and studies of photosynthesis and plant respiration by Ken and Julia Yonetani, towards restarting a lost conversation with trees as living and breathing spirit, to the visual image, as in the work of Andrew Carnie, who studies how the sense of self is disrupted by introducing an organ of another. Catharine Dowson, who studies patterns of blood vessels in the brain and how they nourish healthy and unhealthy tissue. And Helen Pynor, who is concerned with the mystery of biological life and strives to personalize the corporeal body. And into the abstract for Nina Sellars, who scans a fictional interior itself made possible with the play of light. And by abstract, I mean that Nina tries to visualize an invisible world, and in doing so, makes contact with another subset of science-inspired art, physics-inspired art. Now, physics-inspired art in all its glory moves from the macrocosm to microcosm to the macrocosm and back again, from the world of atoms, which can be visualized only with imagery generated by mathematics, to the stars, which appear to us as quiescent dots on a heavenly canopy. And this view belies and conceals the violent paroxysms they undergo as they end their life by, say, going supernova, that is to say, exploding, leaving behind a remnant that could be a black hole or a neutron star, or perhaps simply blowing themselves to smithereens. And then, or maybe the lights going out slowly, as will be the case with our sun, as it moves into, as it becomes a white dwarf star. Back on Earth, David Marron poetically and metaphorically depicts death, and David Angheleddu sees in marine planktons an image strongly evocative of human life, while Oron Katz and Ionat Zurr explore the line between inert and living matter. Stelarc declares the human body to be obsolete and sets out to modifying it, affording us a fascinating glimpse into the future of humankind. Nina Sellars' photographs, which we're sitting amongst, of Stelarc's extra ear project evoke the aura and mystery of ancient dissections lit only by candlelight. Indeed, Nina has told me that they would often put a candle right into the cadaver, giving a really strange light. Even though the term art and science is on everyone's lips, exactly what it is or where it is going is not yet completely clear. Is it leading towards a new culture, a third culture? And by a third culture, I mean a culture in which art and science will be unified in a yet unspecified way that will lead hopefully to new discoveries in consciousness studies, as well as a new way to characterize culture in general and life itself. In this third culture, in other words, interdisciplinarity will be a discipline. Such considerations also raise questions of whether there is a similarity between the creativity of artists and the creativity of scientists, and can we not say that this work also moved towards redefining the notion of art and the concept of and the concept of aesthetics. In my opinion, new sorts of art will emerge, and indeed they've emerged already. Already 50 years ago, in the 1960s, computer art made its appearance, and now we have techno art, which is a combination of kinetic art, light art, robotics, essentially an extension of sculpture, and it applies to dance as well. We have interface art, algorithmic art, information art, better ways to visualize data. And may I say, algorithmic art also opens up the debate once again of whether design is art. And who knows what else. I always like to say that who knew 30 years ago that science and technology would look the way it does today. And indeed, the borderline between science and technology has become blurred to the extent that we see in universities departments with the names of engineering sciences. At minimum, we hope that a climate will arise in which artists and scientists will inspire each other, a climate in which the cultural horizons of artists and scientists will be broadened. And for is it not the case that all throughout the history of science and art, the most momentous scientific discoveries and the most dramatic art movements have emerged from people who have the broadest possible outlook and who can see connections where connections don't seem to exist. This exhibit and this series of debates will address these issues, amongst others, which are central in the 21st century. Before I go on, let me bring to everyone's attention the role played by GV Gallery, where we're sitting, and its moving force, Robert Devcic. He takes a huge risk in showing exclusively science-inspired art, which is still, alas, a fringe movement. But he has thrown his immense energy and enthusiasm behind this project and has also made GV Art Gallery a congenial meeting place for discussion groups about the subject. Indeed, GV Gallery is very much like the academies in ancient Greece. So let me next have the distinguished panelists introduce themselves, and may we not say that they represent the extremes of science-inspired movement, like extreme sports, pushing the boundaries of the possible. Then I will toss up a question and we'll talk about it, then maybe another question, and a half an hour will go by, and then we'll have a break, we'll have some drinks, and then come back and further, and I'll throw open the floor to the audience. So, in alphabetical order, Nina, Oron, and Stelarc. 2 minutes.
I should have my phone here to time it. Okay, so my artistic interests sort of focus on the scientific imaging of the internal structures of the human body. So this goes from Renaissance traditional sort of drawing technique, of anatomical illustrations, right through to our own era of modern medical imaging. The focus that is most important to me is the role that light plays, or the influence that it has on the construction of these images. So the role that light plays in the translation of flesh into image. But then also you can follow on from this and how these images then affect us, these insights that we have into the body, as these images sort of emanate out of a scientific realm and into our popular culture. The images that I have in this exhibition can be sort of seen as being sort of exemplary of this sort of interest that I have. I describe oblique, which is the images that are around us, as being photography imbued with a sort of Baroque aesthetics of light. And then the installation that I have in the far room is inspired by modern medical imaging. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I'm trained in classical, figurative and anatomical drawing. I also teach anatomical drawing at Monash University in Australia and also in their campuses in Italy. And I'm a trained prossector, which means that I used to cut up or dissect bodies for anatomy labs for display. And I use different mediums. I think that's probably, I come at the question of the body and also light from different perspectives by using different mediums. But the one, just to sum up, the one thing that sort of really clarifies and brings my work together, the constant element, is anatomy. So, thanks.
Thank you, Nina. Nina's many-faceted. Oron?
Yeah, so I'm Oron. I'm an artist. I'm interested in life. For the last 15 years or so, I've been working with tissue culture and tissue engineering as my main outlet for my exploration of the shifting perceptions of life. I also run a research laboratory at the University of Western Australia called Symbiotica, which is a fairly unique space for artistic research based within a biological science department, where we are open to residencies, academic programs, workshops, and so on. And I must qualify myself. I'm really exhausted. I just finished a very intensive week of running a workshop to do with art in synthetic biology at UCL. And my brain is exploding out of the whole amazing stuff that we were practicing there. And just by means of the fact that we are framing this as a debate, I disagreed with almost everything that I heard from...
That's good. That's why I have you here.
So yeah, I think that'll be an interesting evening.
Okay, Stelarc.
The first projects I did at art school were helmets that altered my binocular perception. Between 1973 and 1975, I made 3 films of the inside of my body. The third hand began before the first suspension performance was completed in 1980, and this was an EMG-controlled hand that was state-of-the-art at the time to get invitations from the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena and the Johnson Space Center in Houston to demonstrate the hand to the extravehicular activity group. So my interest has always actually been focused on technology and how it generates alternate sort of anatomical constructs. You know, what is a body with an extra hand or a third ear or you know, a 6-legged walking machine? How does a body perform? How does a body operate and become aware in the world? So that idea of sort of coming up with perhaps what you might call post-evolutionary strategies for the body is foremost. I'm presently chairing performance art at Brunel University. Also a senior visiting researcher at the University of Western Sydney. And I'm very, very pleased to be here at this conversation we're having today. Thanks.
Great. Okay, let me throw out the first question, which Oron disagrees with.
You haven't even said it yet.
I know what's coming.
He disagrees with all my questions. Can science-inspired art lead to a new culture? And by the way, of course, you should be thinking also along of your own opinions on this, because I will throw this open for discussion. Can science-inspired art lead to a new culture in the 21st century? I say yes. Nina?
I already want to play with the syntax of the sentence. It's like, you know, can we say like, can art inspire science? But that's more like showing my bias.
No, that's okay.
No.
Can there be an art inspired science?
No. Okay. I think maybe to address the question, I think for me I find it kind of useful, instead of seeing art and science as sort of static nouns, I see them more as an approach to knowledge. So it's an active sort of methodology that's embedded in culture. So maybe instead of seeing art and science as dichotomies or this sort of linear progression, art leads to science, sorry, I already want to swap it. Science leads to art to culture, like this sort of linear progress. maybe like triangulating it almost, like throwing culture in means that then there's no hierarchy. I think they influence the whole sort of process. And then there's no beginning or end. Everything's in flux, everything's on the move. But to maybe answer more directly in a relationship to my work, I think what's coming from the science and that I find interesting now that I'm working in laboratories is that it's the technologies for me that intensify light and sight. So we're seeing more, and what we're seeing is intangible. So no longer can I corroborate what I'm seeing by touching it. I have to use analogy, which is, we already see it introduced very early on, like Robert Hooks, the inventor of the compound microscope. He sort of coined the term cells, and in doing so, he described them being like honeycomb. So the moment that we start to enter into this sort of vision, I think that's where you start to have a different vision and you start working that way. But maybe I've skirted around your answer. But can it inspire you? I don't know.
Right.
Oron, you'll be the
okay, let me try in the meantime I'll also try to unpack what I experienced this week, because I think synthetic biology is a great example of a situation where you have, and we had debates within the workshop between people who call themselves scientists who working with synthetic biology and people who call themselves engineers working with synthetic biology. And I think, from my perspective, it's all part of a larger kind of human project to redefine life. And my concern is not so much about the way our knowledge about life is being produced, it's more about how this knowledge about life is being applied. And as an artist, I'm very interested by them providing me tools, and it's actually the engineers who provide me most of the tools, to then reflect on what life is now. And it's not necessarily to do with science, it's not necessarily to do with art, it's to do with the way life is really shifting in front of our very eyes, in such a way that me, as an artist, I feel that we need to somehow find new ways of articulating this shift in our perceptions of life. And we need to somehow develop a new cultural language to do so.
But don't you need science to observe this flux in life?
I think the most radical shift in our perception, or in our relationship to life, are actually being driven by engineering logics, but by the fact that life is becoming a raw material. And we've seen it time and time again throughout this week, how life is becoming totally instrumentalized and commodified and technologicized to such an extent that we had constant debates about what life is at all, while engaging with life in different levels. And I'm an artist. I have a new palette of possibilities that is being offered to me through this type of developments, which are not necessarily scientific, they're more engineering driven, and I need to both engage with it, but critique it, and try to develop a language that would express some of the zones of
in many areas, the line between science and engineering in many areas, the line between science and engineering is very blurred, it's not clear.
Synthetic biology is a great example where there is a major debate about defining those lines. Mm-hmm. And I think that it was quite apparent for us to see the people who position themselves as scientists and the way they approach this new area, and the people who position themselves as engineers and the way they were kind of engaging with those developments. I would like to see that definition, or at least what I'm interested in is this idea of non-utilitarian research. So I would affiliate myself with scientists in the sense that I'm interested in engaging in non-utilitarian research in order to explore the world around me. While it seems that most of what we refer to as science is actually the utilization of this knowledge, and I want to disrupt it in some way.
It's interesting. You think it's technology, is that? Anyway.
Well, that is interesting, because I think what really connects artists and scientists is the technology, except that artists want to mess with it a bit more than scientists. I think the interesting thing about art is that it generates contestable futures. There's no methodical research leading to possible utilitarian solutions, but rather imagining and reimagining possible futures that can be contested, that can be examined, that might be appropriated, that often are discarded. So it's really what happens between what we consider the traditional arts and sciences, and the slippages that art and sciences generates, that produces this more meaningful space of the other, the alternative, possibly the monstrous, So, art for me should be surprising, sometimes shocking, perhaps pornographic, perhaps violent, often messy, not contained within a lab. Collaborations between artists and scientists can sometimes lead to contamination between the two fields. We don't want to have a situation where artists do bad research and scientists make bad art. So there are, those sorts of issues that need to be addressed.
So you don't believe in this third culture that will emerge? Because science and technology has increasingly affects our lives. I mean,
it does. It always, of course, it always has.
More today than ever, I would say.
Yes, it always has. But I think, as Nina pointed out, these are dynamic systems of interacting within the world, and they should be seen really as systems of operation with complex interactive, feedback loops. And so I think it's difficult to ask the right sorts of questions to analyse what's going on, if that's what's important.
For who?
Well, I'm not asking. I'm
just
trying to.
Let me say this. Let me say this. Is there? Will we see? Because in this third culture, we may see this hybrid exotic creature called the artist scientist. Again, using art in a very broad term. Art not meaning just art as we conceive it today, but culture as well. Along the lines of an Albrecht Dürer or a Leonardo, people who can, and this will of course call for a revamping of our educational systems too, would it not?
But I think we function, because knowledge now has become so specialist and so extended, that the kind of Renaissance kind of model doesn't operate anymore. I think artists might initiate an idea, but often, if it is an interdisciplinary project, then they're going to require the expertise and the equipment that they don't ordinarily have access to.
Can you envision? I mean, as I said, who could have envisioned 30 years ago that science and technology looks the way it does today? So, can we envision something 100 years from now where computer architectures will be maybe use living material? You can really manipulate a screen. There will be a logic of images, whereby a person, some person that we perhaps can't even conceive of now, can sit there and do art and do science in a new way. Do it visually. Do science totally visually.
I was once asked to take part in a program titled Artist in Labs. And it was a program, in fact, initiated by Jill Scott in Switzerland, and the idea was to sort of encourage artists to sort of, to collaborate with scientists in labs, and I said at the time that I would be interested if the scientists were able to do experiments on the artists. I think the relationship of artists and scientists would become a much more intimate one.
Well, there are experiments over there. That's Stellar's art.
Where shall I start?
You have some interesting things to say about. We're talking about a third culture now, and the conversation is going into collaborations.
I kind of agree with Stelarc to some extent. I think there is this area of specialization, although I think that artists can specialize in things that are falling under what seems to be now as scientific technology. They're using the tools. My concern is more to do with the social contract that we have. So as an artist, I'm not interested in producing knowledge in a scientific way. That's not my role. That's not how I want my work to be read. That's not the context in which I want my work to operate. In the very same way that I don't want the scientists that collaborate with us or mentor our artists at Symbiotica produce stuff that can be read as art, because as Stelarc pointed out, the result is usually very nasty research from scientific perspective and horrible art from an artistic perspective, and it's also the way it's being read. But I must admit that quite a lot of, or some of my work have this kind of pseudo-utilitarian approach, and when it's being taken on face value, I've been called a scientist in order to legitimize that work within kind of a larger economic system or a larger technological system, which wasn't my intention. When it's being ridiculed, I'm being called an artist, which is great, because then at least I get the irony of the piece. But in a sense, we need to maintain, and having experience of 15 years now working within laboratories, having scientists as my colleagues and collaborators in the environment in which I operate, and obviously maintaining and running all of those residency programs, up to the date we had about 70 residents, I'm a staunch believer in the integrity of disciplines, especially in this context. And I think that it's going to be resulting in a very messy situation, as well as I believe that due to the power structure, the artists would constantly be exploited if we are going to push them towards this type of third culture, which would undoubtedly result.
Oh, okay. I suppose in my art, I can only sort of refer back to my own arts practice, and just hearing everyone speak, two sort of things. I suppose I'm always interested as images sort of emerge out. It's not that I emancipate anything from a lab, but then when I was thinking about that, I obviously work in wet labs and I teach in wet labs, and in my home life, like I grew up, my brother's a quantum physicist. He's the person who helped me with the piece, the projection piece. So I guess what's been interesting about these questions, I've never actually thought of art and science as being separate. I guess they are, but it hasn't been a question that I posed to myself. But I'm
not considering them as separate. It's science-inspired art is.
You've got a hierarchy.
Yeah, because it doesn't. Does it work the other way? Can it work the other way? Right
I don't know.
There are cases in the history of science where it has, but I'm not sure. At present, anyway.
But just following on from the thought I had was that I see images as sort of a cultural sort of membrane that sort of they show the culture that went into the lab with the scientist, that if you think of an image as a construct, whether you intended all the information that's embedded that image to be there, like there's all your subconscious thoughts that get left in this image making. If you compare, the body hasn't changed since the start of anatomical illustrations, but of course the documentation of the body has varied greatly, and you can normally pick illustrations from different eras. But then also how these images affect us on the way out. So yeah, I work in labs. I stand in two worlds because I'm very obviously involved in art, and I always call myself an artist. But then I've happily been employed in labs, and I've grown up in a home that was very science and art as well. So I guess I do have trouble with this sort of third or separate, or as I said before, I see everything embedded in the cultural aspect first, and then where you locate.
Well, culture would be included in this. Third culture.
But yeah,
it's art, science.
Yeah, and it's funny, like with the questions, I guess also I always hear the science first, and then this linear progression that one leads on to.
But I think we're all doing here science-inspired art, and this is what this exhibit is all about: is biology-inspired art. I don't think the art has affected the biology in any way.
Ah.
Or has it?
No, I don't know. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
But so you feel that having an artist's point of view doesn't actually influence the science at all? So art doesn't have an influence on science?
Yes, I take a part in this debate. Yes.
That's what you're thinking.
It does, because the backgrounds become broadened. The background of the scientist becomes broadened. I once collaborated with an artist in a physics-inspired situation, and I didn't get very much out of. I knew a lot of art. I didn't get very much out of it. The artist got more out of it than I did, and that seems to be the case with a lot of people I've spoken to. Also, it just is the situation now. But the situation can change if artists are better educated and in the sciences. Do you agree? We could move this question out.
Let me pose maybe a different question. Does and obviously you can sense my resistance, first of all, to you talking about a movement. I think this is a very strange way of trying to cluster very diverse artistic engagement with many issues. And I'll pose you a question of if an artist mixes pigments, is that chemistry-inspired art?
No, that's the use of chemistry.
So quite a lot of the works here might be using scientific
that's
tools,
in
but
a-
the subject matter might not be.
That's in a very
directly.
trivial sense, though. I mean, you buy paints in a can and you go outside and mix
Yeah,
them.
but you are seem to kind of confuse the use of tools that seem to be scientific tools with the actual intention of the artist, the subject
that's a
matter
good
that
point,
the artist
but,
engaging with.
I mean,
my interest is life. I'm not interested in science.
Uh-huh.
I'm interested in our relationship to life. It happens that scientific
But
tools
you use
provide me a
science.
new
You
way.
use science to.
No, I'm
to
using scientific tools. I'm not using
science.
science.
Well,
It's like
I
mixing
don't
pigments. I'm not using chemistry.
I don't think there's a difference there.
Yeah.
I mean, paints and tubes was like the atomic bomb of painting in the 19th century, right? Science and go outdoors. You get the feeling that Rembrandt never went outdoors, and he probably didn't. But that's just using a tool. I mean, if you turn on your radio, it doesn't. It's not a.
Yes, so I'm using tissue
Science
engineering
inspires
as my
listening to
tool.
radio.
I'm not using tissue engineering as a way of being inspired by the science. I'm using tissue engineering to explore life and different aspects of relationship to life. And
Well, the use of it, maybe we're conflating the use and inspiration.
Well, I go back to really the more meaningful sorts of questions which were alluded to by Oron, that I think science informs us about life, about how a body operates, how a body becomes aware. I think artists often expose the problematics of such information, and this kind of slippage between experiment and expression becomes, I think, the more interesting realm of operation, where we don't have to sort of depend on categories of one specialty area or another.
Okay,
so what's interesting for me is that at the moment, we're in an age of sort of body hacking, gene mapping, neural jacking, prosthetic augmentation, partially living entities engineered in vitro, stem cells re-injected in vivo to repair the body. What these things indicate about what life is and also what it means, to die are very interesting issues, and they're probably the ones that I'd like to focus on, and perhaps.
How do you intend to do that? You intend to use scientific instruments and concepts and biology?
No, I mean, all of these projects and performances, for example, are sort of gestures, tentative probes about alternate anatomical architectures, how a body might operate, augmented or extended by technology. The idea of seeing life not as a biological given, but rather as increasingly becoming operating in mixed realities.
Right. Okay. So we seem to have three. We have a couple of things going on over here. That we have people that believe there's an art, there's a science, there's a culture, and you don't have to put them all together. You can be. How do you put Oron? You can be
the integrity of disciplines.
Integrity of disciplines.
Although culture is engulfing
bang,
everything.
bang, bang, and
so I can't separate science.
Yeah,
from culture.
that's interesting, but it doesn't seem to reflect in the world in which we live. Let me open up. Let me open this up.
The world in which you live.
Let me open this up. Can we not say that? I will again use the expression "science-inspired art" is a move towards redefining art and the concept of aesthetics.
Well, I think if we see aesthetics as sort of dynamically generated by the diversity of new media, then I'm quite happy with the use of the word aesthetics, and certainly art is constantly operating. I mean, we've got bio art, and now there's nano art, and I'm sure there'll be other kinds of categories of new approaches to art. But using instruments, using microscopes, working in labs, engineering robots, exploring artificial life, artificial intelligence, algorithmically, computationally, all of these different approaches to examining, what it means, what generates aliveness.
Okay, let me interrupt you.
Okay.
I think I'm still stuck on this idea of there's a sense of, obviously, we were saying before about science being utilitarian, and I suppose I was thinking too that an answer or an outcome that is not utilitarian is not of no use. And I guess maybe that's what sometimes gets missed in science. And I know when I work in labs, or if I go, my brother is, he's always known there's a uselessness about me as a sister, but so maybe working with him has been kind of fun. Obviously I'm sort of partly joking with that, but I know when I work in med labs and I say I'm an artist, most of the med people here, you're an illustrator, fantastic, I have this great idea, I want to show you, you do the little images for me, and we'll, So I think they want utilitarian, but just again, sort of stressing that an answer that is an outcome, it's not...
Yeah, one has to broaden the outlook of many scientists as to what is going on out there. Oron, you have some definite views on aesthetics and redefining art.
Let's compromise. We are getting a new...
Good strategy.
Are you...
Good strategy.
Are you giving up?
What science and technology... what science and technology is providing us is a new kind of palette of engaging...
That's what I'm saying.
And I agree with that, although I would disagree...
Just as emotions do.
First of all, but I would disagree with the fact that the artist is produced from that is necessarily inspired by the science. The fact that you have a new palette of possibilities of engaging with matter doesn't make that matter or the way in which the palette has been offered to you the subject of your investigation as an artist, and that's not necessarily the case.
Let me just interrupt here. This is my first foray in curating this exhibition. I'm writing a book on art and science in the 21st century, and I've dealt mostly with the more physical side of things. So this is my foray into biology-inspired art, and what better foray can you get than people like this?
Note to self: be careful who you choose.
I couldn't get better people. But in physics-inspired art. And astrophysics inspired. It's truly inspired by the awe of black holes and the beauty of these things, the immenseness of distances out there, just incomprehensible. Having done astrophysics myself, you just can't. The metaphors are more readily in biology to make biology comprehensible to the general public than they are for astrophysics and physics art. So I'm rather struck here, and I've interviewed these people, I've been talking to them, I've heard this before. And I don't really believe that you believe that you're not inspired by developments in science to do your art. To do your art. I'm
It's not about being inspired. For me, I'm being challenged by that. Yes.
Well, challenged.
And I respond to that. And the thing is, spending my life really in laboratories, in biological labs, I'm constantly being affected by the fact that what I perceive in the lab and what I see going on with life is something that I can't articulate from a cultural perspective, and I try to find ways to do it. But it's not because I'm inspired by the science as much as I'm disturbed by the possibilities that are being offered to me, and I want to explore them. And what disturbs me most is actually, and I think, again, we need to make this distinction between this science and the application of that knowledge. And I think what's disturbing is the way that knowledge is being discussed in forms of application.
Well, isn't challenge the word challenge another way of saying you're inspired? You want to do something. You're challenged. You're inspired. I don't see the.
Well, you're part of a culture of curious experimentation, exploration.
Yes. Right.
It's not so much that you're inspired by science as perhaps science provides sometimes the tools and expertise to enable you to realise.
But doesn't that bring art closer to science? I mean,
I would agree with Nina about this hierarchy that you put there. It's not about.
Okay,
by saying inspired, you
go the other way.
Say that we're in awe with the science.
Okay, challenge means
I'm not saying you're. No, I don't mean to be interpreted as that. Not in awe. I mean, you should, you can read about science, you can read about biology, and you can use it. If you want to talk about it the other way, art-inspired science. To an extent, there is. You want to go back the other way? There's the notions of symmetry, symmetry and beauty.
Yeah.
Huh? Because one works on structure. That's what you're doing, isn't it? You're challenged by science. You're inspired by
I'm
science.
challenged by life, and I'm challenged by the possibilities that life offers to me, and the most radical shifts in the way life is being manipulated at the moment. It happens to take place in laboratories, but again, I would stress that in most cases it's in the engineering pseudo, kind of the biological laboratory of the engineer, the workshop, if you like, as opposed to this knowledge production of the scientist. And that's going back to the fact that I think that there is a major confusion, especially in places like the UK at the moment, where there's no place for open-ended curiosity-based research, neither in the sciences nor in the arts. And we are kind of seem to be all headed towards a utilitarian-based engineering
Scientists are
approach.
not curious people. Is that
Sorry?
true?
But
No, that's
there-
not what you're
No,
saying.
I'm saying
What do you
it's
think?
driven from the outside. There's outside
Yeah.
forces. Places are being defunded because they're engaged in something that seems to be useless.
This is a debate. My brother says exactly the same thing, and maybe that's where we actually come together. Is that is a curiosity path, and I know with my own brother, the more sort of pressures that gets put on from certain research sort of things, it narrows down the possibility because you're expected to have a certain outcome, and that's not actually what happens. It means that actually instead of following an interesting path, you have to be diverted back to a path that you probably wasn't going to be so interesting. But yeah, the curiosity I think is probably the common ground, and that creates an openness for possibilities.
There is a problem too with the, and this might be a rather cynical point of view, of the institutional agenda of sort of authenticating artistic practice by calling it research. In other words, kind of seemingly linking it to valid, aims, methodologies, and outcomes. And we all know that interesting art doesn't always occur in this way. I mean, how would you sort of insert a Damien Hirst or an Oron or survival research labs within an institution, and where would you get support for these sorts of activities? Blender was not funded by the Arts Council. We
This
funded
is a work
it.
Why don't you define that word? I may not know what it is.
Well, it was a project where both artists, Nina and myself, underwent surgical procedures to extract biomaterial from our bodies, inserted this in an installation that once every 5 minutes the compressed air actuated the blender blades, mixing the biomaterial.
Why is that art?
Well, it was an installation where a machine construct was a host for a liquid body composed of biomaterial from two artists' bodies.
So there is a redefinition of art then.
Yes, and we did have to cope with the fact that this was biohazardous material which had to be sterilised. We had to cope with publicly exhibiting this without any publicity because we were sort of concerned that some public health official from the city council was going to close the exhibition. The Ear on Arm project would never have been institutionally funded.
Okay, so there are. Okay, if I can interrupt you now, there are. What is being said over here is that there are projects in science that people would like to do, but they can't get funding for. But that's not the rule. You can't do it. I think you have to admit that. And that what we have seemed to have concluded here is that there can be a art. The concept of what is art is being redefined. The concept of what is aesthetic is being redefined. I seem to be the only one that votes for third culture, but that's okay. Time will tell. Who knows? I suggest that we take a break now. Have a drink or two,
or three,
and then come back, and then I'll open the floor to all of you to jump in. Thank you.